Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video I want to talk about something that's been heavily discussed in the Dragon Ball fandom ever since the Cell Saga of Dragon Ball Z. And that is, how did the original Trunks from the original timeline defeat his androids of Android 17 and 18? Now, as we know in the main timeline of the story, when we're introduced to Trunks, we learn about a number of different things that occurred in his future. Of course, basically everything in the original timeline happened pretty much exactly the same up until the events of Frieza and King Cold coming to the Earth. Originally, Goku defeated both of them after they arrived on the planet looking to get revenge upon him. This is something I actually talked about in depth in my video that you could see up in the top right corner, where I talked about the greatest unseen fight in the history of the franchise. So I would definitely make sure to check that out. But nonetheless, when it actually comes down to everything else after that, we know what transpired. Goku went on to die from the heart virus. The Z fighters were wiped out by the androids 17 and 18. And then the future was devastated, with eventually Gohan being the only one to survive, raising future Trunks essentially kind of like a surrogate father, training him to teach him how to become a Super Saiyan, or in the anime version, he just kind of becomes a Super Saiyan when he gets raged out after Gohan is killed. And then eventually Trunks goes back in time to the main timeline, or the actual unseen timeline is actually where he went. That was the first time that Trunks time traveled, creating another timeline, which is the unseen timeline. And basically everything played out there the same up until the time in which Trunks appeared and took out King Cold and Frieza, much like he did in the main timeline that the main storyline of Dragon Ball Z takes place in. So at that point, what occurred is that future Trunks somehow helped the people in the main timeline, Goku and friends, to defeat and overcome their androids, through means that is never really explained. After that, he goes back to his future, the original timeline, and then of course defeats 17 and 18 as well, which again is never explained. All this is elaborated on by Cell, Imperfect Cell in this case, when he's talking to Piccolo, explaining kind of like what happened there and everything along those lines. And let me actually get into the manga itself and talk a little bit about this, because this leads into the question of, what exactly did Trunks do? So let me pull up the version that we've seen, and then we'll talk about the ones that we didn't. So of course, as we see here, this is the end of the Cell Saga with the main timeline, with the second version of future Trunks that we're introduced to, or the first one we're introduced to, the second one that was created through the course of time travel with the History of Trunks timeline. You know, he goes back to his future, you have this great ending where he returns home, talks to future Bulma about everything that happens, and then, you know, he takes his jacket off to reveal how jacked and muscular he is from his training, goes off and fights the androids and makes very easy short work of them. First off, he flies up to 18, blows her away. You could even see like her leg and like everything being flown away. You know, it definitely wasn't without its brutality. Something that the manga definitely has a lot more of than the anime. And then, of course, you know, we see the same thing happen. 17 is shocked because he's like, there's no way that you could have killed her because she was so powerful compared to you previously. He goes there, he gives him one swift kick, blasts his ass, and now he's gone and no longer exists. And that's kind of how it is. You know, Trunks wiped them out effortlessly because of the fact that he had trained in the original timeline, or in the History of Trunks timelines. Trunks went to the main timeline, he trained there with Vegeta in the Hyperbolic Time Chamber, and then he went in a second time on his own, and he became vastly more powerful, not just in his base, but his Super Saiyan, and also the grades on top of that. You can even make an argument that maybe he became a full power Super Saiyan, or the Mastered Super Saiyan in the Time Chamber the second time, just because of the way that he is depicted in the manga during the Cell games with Vegeta. But that's a whole different discussion in of itself. Now the question is, this is the way that he defeated them in the History of Trunks timeline. Eventually he would also go on to see Cell and also make quick work of him, as we could see here, turns into a Super Saiyan, beats him down, throws him up into the sky. Cell thinks he's going to take advantage of this Kamehameha. Oh no, psh, and he gets wiped down and obliterated pretty easily. So That's the way that Trunks' story ended in the original Dragon Ball manga, saving his future, bringing peace to it, and totally it would be peaceful the rest of time, right? Especially in Dragon Ball Super. But anyway, getting back into that, we don't really know, though, with this being said, of how the original Trunks, which many people call future Trunks, but he is the original one, actually wiped out 17 and 18. Was it like this, for example? Or was it another way? Well, let's get into the first example that many people will say is the way that he went about doing this, which is through the use of the remote shutdown device. So this is speculated not only by fans, but also in the Daizenshu, that Trunks actually was able to go to Dr. Gero's laboratory, just like he did in the main timeline, find the secret bunker underneath where Cell was, and then at that point, he was able to utilize the plans that he found in order to create another remote shutdown device that we could see here with Krillin utilizing, and then, failing to actually use against 18 because, he was thinking with his other head as opposed to the one up here. And at that point, it led to, guess what? Cell absorbing her and becoming perfect because of that. But we all know that Trunks is a little bit more ruthless than that. Trunks is the guy who did not even let King Cold and Frieza transform or go to their full power potentially with King Cold at least. And then, he just wiped them out. Hey, I'll give you a chance to walk away. We're not going to do that. And then he kills them because that's what Trunks does. He gets the job done, except in the future Trunks storyline in Dragon Ball Super. But yeah, either way, when it comes down to that, that's one of the things that many people speculate. Did he use the remote shutdown device? And it's certainly a possibility. Trunks was able to go to Bulma in the future, perhaps, or, even the present. Maybe in the unseen timeline, what he did was that he had brought those plans to Bulma, just like what happened here, and Trunks was the one to use that remote shutdown device to disable the androids in the main timeline, and then they were wiped out by him or by Goku, Vegeta, and so on when they're in their vulnerable state and able to be defeated, and thus in turn he saved the main timeline, or the unseen timeline at this point, went to the future, saved that in the original timeline, even though it wasn't technically the future, and then, defeated them that way. However, with that being said, that might not be what happened, especially because of a number of different things. First off, would Goku and Vegeta and a lot of those other Z fighters really go along with the idea of defeating the androids in such a cheap way, in such a way to where, they're not going to fight them and overcome them through strength alone? They're not really giving them a chance to fight back. Instead, they use a cheap tactic of disabling them with a remote shutdown device that Dr. Gero created to keep them in line, and thus, perpetuating that cycle of enslavement and then wiping them out just because of who they are. I talked about that a little bit too in this video up here, you could see, where I talked about the reason why Goku was right to spare Dr. Gero in the future Trunks, or really the Cell Saga of Dragon Ball Z. So that's a big question then and there in of itself. Another thing is too that most people just assume that Trunks in the original timeline did not train in the Hyperbolic Time Chamber when he went back to the unseen timeline. But there's literally zero indication actually given to suggest that idea. And if we actually go back here and we look to when Goku first woke up from his heart virus, what he says is that he heard everyone talking in his dreams during it. Goku has this kind of clairvoyance that is demonstrated throughout the original manga. Maybe you can argue he inherited it from Bardock in the anime version, but, that's a whole different can of worms and continuity in and of itself. But, we get into that and he realizes that he doesn't plan to fight the androids or even Cell because he knows that he and Vegeta simply can't win. So instead, he's going to transcend the Super Saiyan, and the way he's going to do that is there's a place where I can spend a whole year in a day. Hey, Chi-Chi, can I bring Gohan with me? Not in your life. Bitch, he's going with me because the whole world's going to be doomed, even though I know that you care more about his studies. But anyway, what he ends up doing, he grabs Gohan, then he goes to find Trunks and Vegeta sitting right over here. Vegeta is staring off into space, and he has been doing that for the past 3 days, trying to see beyond Super Saiyan and transcend it through kind of a vision quest of sorts, let's say, through overcoming it mentally before he could do it physically. Like he says, Vegeta's a genius, all right. So the thing is, as he says, he's been standing there for the past 3 days. So he's been standing there likely even before anything about Cell was ever revealed on the news. Same thing with Goku. Goku probably might have come up with this idea, theoretically, before he even had any indication that Cell existed. So there's nothing that ever tells us that Cell's presence in the main timeline is what caused the Z Fighters to go into the time chamber in order to gain more power in order to transcend Super Saiyan. It really goes to show you, or, it makes a lot of sense that theoretically what would happen is that, Goku, Vegeta, Trunks, and Gohan would all want to train in the time chamber regardless, because the androids are still way more powerful than them, especially, if Android 16 so happened to exist in the unseen timeline. There's no real indication given if he did or if this was another butterfly effect that kind of rippled out to where Cell was there. And thus, as a result, there's a very strong chance that the way that Trunks defeated the androids, not only in the present or the unseen timeline, but also in the history of Trunks timeline, is the way that he was able to beat them is exactly the way that we see here. That he just went to the future, blew them away because he was vastly more powerful than them, and then that was it. He was done. Theoretically, he thought he was done. But of course, in the original version of the story, Trunks does not have this foreknowledge that he does of the coming of Cell that allows him to predict that Cell is going to show up and then in turn do what he needs to do in order to beat him. 3 years after he goes back to the future, he finally has refueled the time machine. Cell shows up ready to steal the time machine from him because he knows the android's been defeated. This is after Cell, incubated in his larval state, came out of the test tube, was looking for 17 and 18, realized they were defeated somehow, and then in turn killed the original Trunks, stole his machine, went back to the past, got to get back to the past, Samurai Jack, great show, and then in turn he went and defeated basically everything that occurred over the course of the main story. However, that doesn't happen here. Trunks stops that loop and that cycle because he knows that Trunks is there, or he knows that Cell is coming. He does this entire thing as kind of a ploy in order to lure Cell out. We don't even know if he ever actually goes back to the past after this happens. We never see it occur, as you could see right here. And then, it seemingly is never referenced at all in the anime or manga afterward, unless you count the BoJack movie, which I don't. And he wipes him out. Trunks is completely aware Cell is coming, and thus in turn, what does he do? He defeats him, he kills him, and he makes it where his threat no longer exists. However, the original future Trunks would have had no idea who Cell was, that he was coming, and then in turn, what does he do? Well, maybe Cell just did something that became extremely popular in Dragon Ball Super and caught base Trunks off guard. Even though Trunks is able to send Cell flying with his Ki, he still isn't as powerful as Cell in his base form, because the fact that the base form is vastly less powerful than Super Saiyan. I know a lot of people are like, oh, the base forms at this point are way stronger than even Super Saiyan Goku on Namek. Nothing really ever indicates that for me in the story, and sometimes people love to overinflate power levels. Like they argue that the full power Super Saiyan, for example, is a even greater multiplier than regular Super Saiyan, and so on and so forth. That's a whole other can of worms in of itself, though. But nonetheless, this whole situation wouldn't have occurred this way in the original storyline. Trunks would have had no reason to suspect that Cell was going to show up. He would have had no reason to think that this weird bug creature that just popped out of nowhere is somehow more powerful than Super Saiyans, on Namek at least. And then in turn, he would have had no reason to think he needed to put his guard up. Maybe Cell was able to suppress himself to such a point he snuck up on Trunks, and then as we see in the anime version, he basically strangles him. He kills him when he at least expects it. So The anime version, of course, we do see Trunks does not look like this. He isn't really Diesel like this, he looks almost more like the Dragon Ball Super version, where he looks like he's just been eating salad and doing cardio all the time. Harold loves that. And the scrawny Trunks, as he likes to call him. And, that's kind of the thing. It's entirely possible that in the anime version, maybe he did beat them with the shutdown device just because of, the non-canon flashback that we have of Cell killing him. It's never actually shown in the manga. But nonetheless, in the manga version, it's entirely possible that Trunks did train the time chamber. He defeated them the exact same way he did here. And then in turn, what ends up happening? Well, Cell took advantage of a situation, killed him right out, and then stole his time machine and created the main timeline and the History of Trunks timeline that this whole thing is taking place in that I'm showing you right now. And then in turn, what happened? Well, he ended up overcoming. He ended up, winning basically the whole thing by becoming perfect, and then he lost in the appendices. It's like if Sauron won in Lord of the Rings, then he gets defeated in like the little appendices that Tolkien wrote at the end, basically. That was the whole Cell games in a nutshell. Cell could have been like, I'm perfect. Put his hand right toward the earth, fired, goodbye everyone, you're all dead except for Cell because he could breathe in space, and then maybe Boo would wake up and, again, we would see where that would go. But the idea is Cell won, it was over, and then because of his own arrogance, because of the cells of the Saiyans, like, Trunks not in this case, but definitely Trunks' father, Vegeta, he was way more prone to being able to, be deceived by his own pride through one of the 7 deadly sins for a reason, and then in turn led to his own defeat. And then in the future, he also was defeated because of the fact that he let everyone know who he was to Piccolo, how they could find him, how he got back in time. If he had just shut his mouth and blown up the earth when he had the chance, none of this ever would have happened. But that's kind of Cell and Dragon Ball villains in a nutshell. Stop playing with your food, just blow the planet up. Nobody can breathe in space in this franchise except for when they can. You got it all won, and it's all taken care of. And so that answers the question for me, or at least provides multiple different types of answers for how did the original Trunks defeat the androids. So what do you guys think? Do you think that Trunks defeated the androids using the remote shutdown device? Do you think that he defeated them by training in the time chamber? Do you think maybe he just brought Goku and Vegeta or somebody with him to the future with him and they all teamed up and defeated the androids? What do you think happened? How do you think he did it? And how do you think Cell was able to defeat him? Maybe I'll do a whole video about that in the future too. Let me know in the comments down below. Also, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stick around for a lot more to come in the future, and I will see you on the next video.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.